The biggest reason that I upgraded to the RED Komodo is... How's it going, everybody? Today I'm going to be telling you all the reasons why I decided to pre-order a RED Komodo. So unless you've been living under a rock, you probably already know that RED released a brand new, very smaller, less expensive cinema camera called the RED Komodo, and it's only $6,000 US, which compared to a lot of other REDs is really cheap. Obviously that's super expensive for a camera still, but for a cinema camera, relatively cheap. I've been dreaming about buying a RED camera for a really long time. They're pretty much one of the best cameras you can buy next to an RE, and they're really well known in the filmmaking business. So when RED released the Komodo at that bit of a cheaper price, it just kind of, after thinking about it for a while, made me take that next step, and I'll give you some of the reasons why right now. So the first reason why is that global shutter sensor, and this is actually a first for RED and a first on a lot of cinema cameras. Most cinema cameras don't actually feature that. And basically, if you don't know what that means, is on a traditional sensor of a camera, the sensor will read the image from top to bottom and record the image from top to bottom. So when you do a really quick pan and you have a bunch of trees in the frame, they might look like they're a bit at an angle, whereas a global shutter sensor takes the entire image at once. So you get everything in frame at once, and it doesn't read down the sensor bit by bit. So when you're doing those really quick pans with things like trees or straight things in the frame, you're going to get a very perfectly straight line. Basically what this results in is really good looking handheld footage, and anything that has fast moving action, which if you don't know, I shoot a lot of action sports, is just going to look a lot more natural and just have a better feel to it, if that makes sense. Now, one of the other things that really sold me on the camera is the dynamic range. RED claims that it has 16 stops of dynamic range, which is absolutely absurd. And while other tests have proven to have a little bit less, regardless, the image still looks really nice and looks like it has much more dynamic range than a lot of prosumer cameras you can buy nowadays. Having a lot of dynamic range is a staple in a good looking cinema image, and you can really tell the difference between a camera that has a lot of this and a camera that doesn't, and it really just subtly sets yourself apart. Now, one other thing that I really love that RED added to the Komodo is the ability to wirelessly control and monitor it from your phone. The Komodo does have a built-in Wi-Fi antenna that you can connect to an app, and you can actually see what you're shooting and change the settings on the fly, which is super helpful. Now, from the tests I've looked into, apparently this has actually a relatively low latency for being just on a Wi-Fi connection. So I don't know if I'd use it for monitoring for like a super high-speed car chase scene or something like that, but for daily things or slower scenes, you could absolutely just have your client or your director monitor via their phone, completely wirelessly, eliminating the need for a Teradek in certain situations. Now, one of the most important and I think most underrated things that people aren't really talking about this as much is the RED color science. RED is super well known for having a very distinct look built into their cameras, and the RED Komodo is no different. This is something that you can't really read off of a spec sheet. It's more just a feeling that comes across in the image. Now, obviously you do get that 16-bit color depth, which is super helpful when you're grading the image, but the colors that come out of this camera itself just have a certain feeling to them that's definitely next level. Now, that's all good fun, but there's one thing that I'm actually really not stoked about for owning the RED Komodo, so let's jump into that. Now, the thing that I'm not that stoked about is the frame rates and cropping that happens on the RED Komodo 6K sensor. Now, this happens in all REDs, even their more expensive Gemini and Helium cameras, but every time you want to shoot in a higher frame rate, in the Komodo's case higher than 40 frames per second, you have to crop into that sensor and make your image smaller and smaller every time you want to get to a higher frame rate. So for example, when you want to shoot 60 frames per second, you have to crop into 5K. When you want to shoot 120 frames per second, you have to crop all the way into 2K, which really makes your image nice and tight and also just doesn't use as much of that sensor, which makes your slow motion footage more noisy and less desirable. Now, I think this partially has to do with that global shutter, just because it is a lot harder to do a full sensor readout of 120 frames per second. But regardless, there are much cheaper cameras that have much better frame rates with less of a crop on them. So it's kind of a bummer to downgrade in that sense. Now, everything that I've talked about is all super important stuff, but it's not the meat and potatoes of what I wanted to talk about today. Because in reality, the biggest reason that I upgraded to the RED Komodo is the RED name and the R3D codec. Now, this might sound pretty stupid if you're not in the film industry, but people actually value having a RED branded camera or an RE branded camera in the higher end film industry. Once you get to a certain point at a higher level of commercial filmmaking or narrative filmmaking, Everyone's shooting on either a RED or an RE, and it's pretty much non-negotiable. All post-production workflows are working with either RE RAW or R3D RED code RAW files, and it's just so streamlined and they're so used to that to change that is just basically not going to happen. One of my goals as a filmmaker is to get more and more projects where I'm hired directly by a production company or director as the DP cinematographer on a shoot. And having your own camera to bring with you to save cost for the production company and to not have for them to rent out a separate camera is going to just help me get more jobs. Specifically, owning a RED branded camera will actually get my foot in the door within those production companies that will, for some reason, take me more seriously just because I have a certain branded camera. I know, it sounds ridiculous, but that's just how it is. Now obviously you can't just buy a RED camera and expect to be hired by a bunch of high-end commercials and instantly you're a cinematographer, and I don't expect that either. I made a calculated choice based on the position I'm in and the skill set that I feel like I have, and this feels like it would open a few more doors for me that would definitely pay the camera off within a couple years. Now, is it guaranteed? Well, absolutely not. Nothing's guaranteed. It is a bit of a risk for me to spend this much money on a camera. It is a large amount of money and a big investment for me, but I definitely think it's something that will help me level up to that next level of production and quality and being able to work with those production companies and for those directors, as I mentioned. So I want to turn it over to you. What do you guys think? Are these legit reasons to want to spend that amount of money on a camera? What are your thoughts on the RED Komodo, or do you think I should stick with the Blackmagic? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to chat about it with you. If you guys did enjoy this video, make sure you click the like button down below. It actually does make a difference, and be sure to subscribe if you want to see more videos about cameras, filmmaking, lights, everything in the film industry. Stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next video.